Welcome back to Ion Radio. I'm John. I just got back from the Las Vegas Open Armada tournament. So I was going to go over what fleet I played, my different opponents that I faced, and then my final standings and final thoughts on the tournament. So let's get to my fleet, and I'll explain what I brought, why I brought it, and if I thought it worked or not, and then we'll go over my opponent's fleet, and then I got pictures of all the different matches so that you guys can see kind of what's going on. So stay tuned and see what's coming. Okay, here's my fleet. Some of you might notice it from one of our episodes that we've recently done. This is my Y-wing bomber fleet. We start off with an MC-75 armored cruiser. My commander is Dodonna. I use him because he's cheap, and his abilities kind of tie well in when you're just using bombers. On it, I have Strategic Advisor to gain me an activation like advantage, so if I'm first player, second player, I can just toggle it so I can see what my opponent does first. Electronic Countermeasures because I like staying alive, and then the last three upgrades are kind of like choices that most other people wouldn't make. I have Ruthless Strategists, which allows me to do a damage to one of my fighters after my ship flaks a fighter, if they're engaged. So when I think I have 6 Y-wings in this fleet, I don't care if I do an extra damage if I'm doing a damage to you. So if you go against like an Imperial list that only have like 3 health fighters, you could flak a fighter down in one turn. That goes very well with Ordnance Pods. So I get my armored cruisers, blue bat, lack dice, possibly 1 damage, possibly 2, ruthless, so minimum of like 2 damage then. And then at the end of my attacks, I get to make another attack out of a round with a black dice, so hopefully another damage and then another ruthless. So my MC-75 can do anywhere between 2 at a bare minimum with that, all the way up to 5 damage to a squadron. The last thing is XX9s, and it's really just there to trigger Dodonna if the MC-75 is activating and is hitting a ship and it gets through its shields. You can just really fish crit with that. The next ship is just Yavaris on a Nebulon-B Escort. A lot of times people target Yavaris because Yavaris is very, very, very powerful, and because of that I decided to run it pretty much naked. So if it dies, I don't sacrifice too many points because I don't have that many points invested into it. So if you kill Yavaris, you only gain, 62 points with the build like this. So if I can put Yavaris in a spot that it can trigger the bombers into a ship, it's worth it. As long as it's trading, and it most likely will trade up in value if I'm killing the enemy's big ships. The last 2 ships are both medium transports, and the first one has Bomber Command and boosted comms. I'm running so many bombers, almost all my ships are bombers, so it makes sense to put a Bomber Command in. All of my ships attack with blue, my fighters attack with blue flak and things like that, so Toryn is big and CommsNet. Yes, it's activation padding, but also they're there to command fighters because I have so many of them. I need additional ships just to command all of them. So let's get to the fighter contingency. We start off with Jan. Jan is just there in case I run into someone and they have fighters. I can then move through them and still bomb their ships if I want to. I have 2 X-wings pretty much just there to protect Jan and to soak up damage as my ships are moving into position to flak and my Y-wings are getting free to bomb ships. Norra Wexley has a fantastic ability that when a bomber does a crit, you can just wipe out a shield. So with so many bombers, I could just go into a front arc of almost any ship, and as long as you get that hit crit, they have to decide what they're doing with that 2 damage on top of taking an automatic shield hit. So initially when you lead with her into a ship just to wipe out their shields. Gold Squadron goes extremely well with that because you have 2 blue dice that you're rolling against ships, and with Toryn Farr, with rerolls, you could probably get those crits off and more than likely not just a crit, but 2 damage that your opponent has to deal with. Then we have the last part of this fleet, and that is just 6 Y-wings. They have a ton of health. Their attack is very poor, it's just 2 blue, but when you're looking at it from the perspective of we're just going to chip damage, if you get near my MC-75, it's going to chip damage with Ruthless, possibly 4 damage. A Y-wing can come in and do 1 damage and pretty much kill a ship off then. So the idea is if I run against a fleet that's not running squadrons, I just can blitzkrieg across to them and bomb them to death. I've taken out, with this fighter group, an entire ISD in one go. So it's very powerful. But if they do have fighters, then you just kind of hold back around your ships and let them come into you. They're probably not going to kill all of your Y-wings all in one go because there's just so many of them and they have so much health. And then you flak them to death with Ruthless, and then you move on to their ships after that. My objectives that I chose with this are your standard fighter objectives. We have Precision Strike, just because I have bombers and I can get a lot of points with that. Fighter Ambush, again, because at any time I hit a ship, I get points for it. And then Superior Positions. I mainly take Superior Positions just for deployment. You automatically lose the deployment. And then if it just so happens that I can get a bomber or a ship into your rear arc, that's great. But it's mainly there just so I can control how we deploy onto the table. Because knowing how your opponent sets up is huge. So that's my fleet. Let's go talk about my opponents, how the matches went, and how I did. Okay, so my first opponent was Justin. He came from Colorado. This was actually his first tournament. He's played before, and he's currently playing Rebellion in the Rim campaign, which, we do as well on this channel. So he brought a Radis list. His Radis list was this. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you guys. He had an MC-80 Star Cruiser with Radis, Bail Organa, Caitlin and Sholin, engine techs, heavy ion emplacements, spinal armaments, and Mon Cal. He drops in an MC-75, which, if you guys watch the channel, you know I'm a big fan of. It has Damage Control Officer, Ordnance Experts, Electronic Countermeasures, External Racks, Wide Area Barrage, and Profundity. His Profundity ship is a CR-90 Corvette B. It has Lando Calrissian, MS-1 ion cannons, and Janna's Light. I imagine the idea is that you can drop this ship in and then deactivate something important for the opponent. More than likely, it would deactivate or exhaust an ECM so that the MC-75 and the Star Cruiser can hit it very hard and kill something in probably one turn. The rest of the list is 2 GR-75 medium transports. One of them has CommsNet and the other has Slicer Tool. Okay, so for this match, he outbid me, so he made me go first. My list doesn't really care if it goes first or second. I am fine going first because going first with a bunch of squadrons is awesome, but my objectives I am very happy with playing. But he made me go first, and I chose Solar Corona out of his list. I deployed on the left side of the table, as you see here. I set up with the idea that my MC-75 can go straight and then turn and go down the middle of the board, while my other ships are angled to the side in case he sets up on the opposite side of me that they're already heading in that direction, and then I won't have this whole turning into each other issue. But if he sets up right against me, then I can swirl around him and keep control of my fighters as they just move across the table. I had to deploy all of my things first, and then he got to deploy, and he deployed in the opposite corner like this. This is a very interesting deployment. I don't know if personally I would do this. Personally, the way I play Radis is let's blitzkrieg across and try to kill things as fast as possible. He chose to bail on turn 4, which after the game we both talked about, and he said probably was a mistake. And I would probably agree with him on that. I think that it would be much better on turn 5, which is what Justin thought as well. So after the first turn, you can see that my MC-75 has sped up and it's turning to go straight down the table. My fighters are shifting to stay in activation range of all of my ships and ahead. My plan at this point is when he starts to get close, I'm going to spread out my fighters so that he can't Radis his ship in that area. It's just going to be an area denial. I want him to deploy on my side of the table or right into that debris field and asteroid field that you see on the top there. All of his ships are moving rather slowly, so he doesn't move forward very much. And so the first couple turns, we're just really positioning ourselves. As you can see, this is turn 3, and I'm continuing to fly in. My ships, my Yavaris and my transports are going slowly forward, again staying in squadron activation range, and my MC-75 is swinging around to go down the middle of the table. You can see my fighters are starting to spread out, and his ships are continuing to come in. This is the beginning of turn 4. And if you remember, Bail is set to go off this turn, so that Liberty will go first this round. I imagine just by the setup that he's going to Radis drop in this turn, because there's a very good chance if he doesn't Radis drop in this turn that I will kill his Liberty from just positioning. If you can see, I've spread out my fighter, so there's no place for him to put his ship without putting it directly in the line of the fighters, or near my table edge, or above into that asteroid field. I am fine with either of those deployments. If he deploys on my side of the table, the ship is pretty much out of position, and if he just deploys it into the rocks, I will be able to jump on him immediately with all my fighters. So he did deploy this turn. If you can see, he did deploy it toward my edge of the table. And then he profundity in his Corvette. This is a very poor position for him because it's kind of out of the combat. With the Liberty going first, it's going to have to move into my bombers, and I will focus on trying to kill that first. And then I will shift focus to the MC-75 from this angle as it comes in, and that's pretty much what happened. The Liberty was going speed 3 at this point and jumps right into the Hornet's nest, and it just becomes bomb, 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 bomb. And it very much limits what type of shots he can take. His Corvette, though, it killed my transport. Just double arcing me with blues against a transport. It doesn't like it. Concentrate fire. So I took 3 shots of blues, and then I took 3 more shots of blue. And that's not fun. So we can see now, this is turn 5. The Liberty's gone, the transport's gone. Yavaris is hurting. I decided to turn it in, so then the MC-75 only had a front shot on me and not a double arc on me, and my strongest shield is facing him. The transport that's directly behind the MC-75 is a slicer transport. Thankfully, he ended up ramming his own ship and not being able to get in range of my Yavaris this turn. So at this point, I'm now shifting everything toward bombing the MC-75, and his damage control officer got a good workout because everyone was in range of Norra, so he had to use it to cancel out the Norra. If he didn't have that card, which most people don't run MC75s with, it would have gone down a lot faster. So this is the start of turn 6. Sadly, you can see that Slicer transport got in range and was able to slice Yavaris, which stinks, because I would have loved to have gotten off a bunch of bombing into that 75. And if you guys have watched the channel, you know very well that I love leaving ships and squadrons and everything on 1 health. So after my activations, the MC75 is on 1 health, and my transport is almost dead as well. And he attacked Yavaris, leaving Yavaris on 1 health, and then wide area over to my transport, killing my transport, and then ramming into Yavaris, killing Yavaris. And that was the end of the game. So the end of the game, the final score was my opponent scored 119 points, and I scored 297 with a difference of 178, meaning I got an 8-3 my first round. This game was a lot of fun, and Justin actually recognized me from our channel, so shout out to Justin. You were a great opponent, and good luck with your other tournaments and your Rebellion and the Rim campaign. He's also playing Rebel, so right now, being the Rebel player for our channel, I'm rooting for the Rebels. Okay, on to round 2. Round 2, I played Nick. Nick came from Salt Lake City, and he was running an Akbar list. We actually tied in bid, and I won bid, and I chose for him to go first. My thought was I looked at his list, and I didn't want to mess around with his objectives. I already think that my list would struggle against an Akbar list, and I just didn't want to mess with that. I would rather just play my objectives for this. He had 2 Assault Frigate Mark II-B. Both of them were equipped with the same upgrades, except one had Akbar on it. They both had Intel Officer, gunnery teams, electronic countermeasures, and linked turbolaser towers. He also had a Pelta assault ship with Ezra, engine techs, intensify firepower, and external racks. His last 2 ships were GR-75s, just medium transports with CommsNet, and one had Hondo, and then he had 4 Y-wing Squadrons, which they were a bane to my existence. Again, I love leaving things at 1 health, and as we go through it, you'll see that's what I kept doing. So, Nick chose out of my objectives Fighter Ambush, which I think is probably the best objective of mine to choose to play, especially with his fleet. Because then he had more ships than me, he could have deployment advantage. So this is how we lined up. Basically, I stuck the MC75 in the corner, and it was the same basic idea that I had in the other one, is depending on where he deploys then, my ships can turn to face them. I then just dropped all my squads around that asteroid field, so they were a little bit farther in front of me. Started turn 2. I was like, oh boy, I'm going to be in trouble, because both those assault frigates were going to just slash right across my front, and my ships aren't going to stand much of a chance against Akbar and Intel officers and intensified and linked. It just wasn't going to be fun, especially with the A-wings just locking me down. So in this one, as you can see at the start of turn 3, we've engaged our squadrons, and my squadrons are sitting in a dangerous spot with all this overlapping anti-fighter flak. Also, every one of his fighters took way too much to try to take down it. I left everything on like 1 health, and then just had to keep throwing fighters, my Y-wings, into it to kill them. And his A-wings did a very good job of jumping over my escort and attacking Jan, which was frustrating because then I had to attack his squadrons before I could start bombing. So I think it took me 3 rounds total to clear out 4 A-wings, which is a ridiculous amount of time, but he played them extremely well in defending his ships. Thankfully, I was able to stay pretty much just out of range of him, and then the way he deployed it, it's amazing that he didn't run into his own ships. Phenomenal flying at this point. But because his transports are in the back and they already have a damage from running into each other because of it's tight, he kind of had to move his combat ships that are in the front that are just out of range, which worked out for my benefit. The next round you can see that Yavaris went down, but she did her job in pushing fighters and helping take down that Pelta. Now I'm switching, if you can see, the one that's closer to my edge, the frigate, is Akbar, and I don't think I have the firepower to kill that ship, so I'm just switching over to the second frigate. If I can bring that down, then I pretty much win the game. The 75 at this point is starting to accelerate to speed 3 because I have that entire table edge to run away from and command fighters and just let my fighters do what they do, which is bomb. At this point, he had stripped off both my scatters from my transports, so I pretty much knew that they were dead. So I just needed to keep them in play, doing what they do, pushing squadrons, letting me re-roll dice as long as possible. As you can see, at this point, we decided to pretty much call the game. We both knew that none of our main combat ships were going to be getting into range, and I wasn't going to be able to move my squadrons close enough to his frigate to kill it. At this point, most of my squadrons are on like 2 health, or at least all my important aces, and I didn't want to give up points, so I'm not going to commit them to a game that I've already won. So that's it. That game ended with me scoring 310 points and my opponent scoring 164, and it was very close for him to be scoring more. I believe Norra had 1 health left, and most of my squadrons were about to die. He did a phenomenal job of flacking them down. So that was another 8-3 win for me. Okay, so my third round opponent was Josh from Omaha. He was running a Riken list. He had a CR-90B with Riken, Ahsoka, Tano, and Tavian 4. He has a Neb-B Escort frigate with Wing Commander, Auxiliary Shield Teams, and Yavaris, because that's the title you use with frigates. He had a Hammerhead Torpedo Corvette with Hondo, Boarding Engineers, and External Racks. And then he had 2 GR-75s, both with Bomber Command. One had Boosted Comms and Quantum Storm, and the other had Toryn Farr and Bright Hope. And then he had an all very nasty ace list that goes well with Riken because he loves aces. He had Corin Horn, Gold Squadron, Jan Ors, Luke Skywalker, Norra Wexley, the War Criminal Nim, and Wedge Antilles. He outbid me, and he did to me what I did to my last opponent, which was make me go first so that I had to choose his objectives, and they were not fun objectives to choose from. He had Precision Strike, Contested Outpost, and Whale Farming, which I wasn't going to do. I was torn between choosing Precision Strike and Contested Outpost. And in the end of the day, I decided to go with Contested Outpost for 2 reasons. One, I had the MC-75, And if I could get it close to the outpost, then he would have to have a good amount of his ships right there. And if they were right there, then I was able to shoot him because I have bigger combat ship compared to his ships, which were all small ships. Also, with him having all aces that he could keep alive, I was worried that when our fighter wings go through each other, he could possibly get more damage onto me, and then I would just be giving him points at that point at a higher rate than contested outposts, because at least contested outposts is a limited number, and I have more command dials, so I should be able to get more points. So this is how we set up. I set up so that my MC-75 can go straight and then curve into the station. Yavaris could go across the board and then go around that rock to get aimed toward the station, and then my transports could roll toward the station whilst providing support for both my vessels with just fighter bobs in between. The first couple of rounds, we just are positioning. As you can see here, my fighters and everything are going where it is. I got a protective line in front of me, and he is just holding that station for this turn, and we're both kind of just feeling each other out until we make a strike. And that strike happens, and there's a fighter ball mess. Most of his fighters, you can see, are in the front arc of my MC-75, but at this time they are not in range, and I'm not in range of them, and they're not in range of me. You can see down here we have Wedge and Jan and a bunch of my squadrons. A few of my squadrons are in range of Yavaris, which is all the way down at the bottom, that I just did a bump to keep kind of where she was. So what I did is I opened up with an X-wing double tapping into Jan, and then a Y-wing. I think I used Norra because of her 3 dice into Jan to kill Jan, and then switched the rest of my fighters up toward my MC-75. And then flacking and ruthlessing, and then him attacking me, and it's insane because we pretty much both, spoiler alert, at the end of the game wiped out both of our fighter bombs, which is pretty impressive because killing a Riken ace list is impressive, and killing a bazillion health Y-wing list is impressive. Like, this is honestly one of my favorite games I've ever played. It was just very intense and very well played by both players. So at this point, there was a hard decision. So I had to figure out, in this mess, what to activate first. And it was a very, very hard choice. So my transport that is in the middle of the screen between Yavaris, my other transport, only has 1 hull left. So if I move it forward, it's going to run into his transport and we could both die. So what I end up doing is the transport that's flying into both of his transports, I activated it. I moved some fighters around to do a ton of damage to his fighters, flak, and then move forward 1, ramming his transport, killing it. My idea then was waiting to see what he activated, because his transport's in his way of Yavaris, and Yavaris, if it stays there, is probably dead from the MC-75. So my next ship to activate would be my transport on 1 health, moving it forward in the hopes that I would survive and Yavaris would ram me, staying where Yavaris is. That did not happen. He had a fantastic roll, and he killed my transport, allowing him to escape that. This is also another good example of me leaving things on 1 hull. So at this point, I'm now getting control of the tokens from the station. His Yavaris managed to escape, and I've now done a good amount of damage to the hammerhead, leaving it, of course, like really close to 1 health. which is, what I do. And this activation, I end up firing into the back of his Yavaris, and the SX9s go off, and I get to look at a bunch of cards. I give him the card that gets rid of all of his shields, so I take all of his shields off his front of his ship, and I don't remember what the next crit I did, but taking the shields off the front of the ship was huge, because then my Yavaris has a shot lined up into it. And his ships are flying around, and he's running his squadrons away because both of them are on, 1 health, so they're both almost ready to die. And this is where the game ended. Sadly, the game was called to time. If it went another round, I believe that I would have won, because I would have activated my Yavaris here. I really needed to kill his Yavaris, and I moved Norra, who utterly failed me, in to bomb the side of Yavaris with no shields, roll a black, blank. Re-roll with Bomber Command, blank. So Yavaris right now is limping away with 1 health. You have this X-wing squad, which is also on 1 health. And then you have a Y-wing squad of his up on that asteroid that is also, I believe, at 1 or 2 health. It's very, very close to dying. So he has 3 things out there that are close to dying. At the beginning of this turn, I get the station, if we were able to play the station this turn. But time was called, and we weren't able to get there. So at the end of the game, he scored 185 points with tokens, and I scored 174 points with tokens, meaning that he beat me by 11 points, being 5-6 for me. This was one of the most intense games of Armada that I've ever played, and I would love a rematch, and I told Josh that, and if he ever comes up to Chicago, to look me up, and I would be more than happy to try to record a game of this, because if I could have recorded this game, this would have been a beautiful game to watch. It was just an amazing game. But then that leads us to the 4th round. So my 4th opponent was Lewis. Lewis came up from Mexico. This is the first player that I've played from Mexico. The only players that I've played from outside of the country previous to this were the Canadians that I faced at Worlds. Lewis also brought a Riken list, which I was not thrilled to face after facing a Riken list the previous time. It's a meat grinder type list, and it takes a lot of brain work to play squadron intensive games back to back to back. Lewis has MC-75 armored cruiser with Riken, 8R Talon, flight controllers, boosted comms, external racks, and leading shots. He also has, big surprise, a Nebulon-B Escort frigate with Ray Antilles, medical team, and Yavaris, because again, if you have an Escort frigate, you should bring Yavaris. And then his last ship was a GR-75 medium transport with Toryn Farr, Bomber Command, boosted comms. His squadrons are a very, very mean bombing list of Dutch Vander, Jan Oors, Kian Farlander, Norra Wexley, the War Criminal Nim, Wedge Antilles, and Ten Nub. When I saw this list, I was like, this is not going to go well. And I was very worried about Ten Nub just going off pretty much 3 times between 8R Talon and Yavaris into my Y-wings, pretty much killing all my Y-wings in one go. So I was concerned about that and needed to try to prevent that. So let's take a look at the game. Lewis had a 1-point bid on me, and he chose to go first. And out of my objectives, he chose Fighter Ambush, which, again, is probably the best objective to play against me, especially if you're doing bombing yourself. So I was going to be at a severe deployment disadvantage due to the fact that I can't deploy my squadrons until last. So if you look at the board, I decided to lay kind of a trap, and I dropped the outpost on my side in a corner, and then we kind of just put all the obstacles on that side. I've never intended to go onto that side. I wanted to set up and force him more to come to me. So my first thing I put down was the transport on the back, and then he put his transport down in the corner, and I'm like, okay, cool. My ships can go on the other side, and that transport will be out of the game for the entire game. Then he dropped down his MC-75, where it is, and I dropped down my other transport. I think at this point he realized that I was not intending to deploy on that corner whatsoever, and dropped his fighters and Yavaris down where you see them there, and then I positioned the rest of my stuff over here. So my idea in this is Yavaris is going to go slow toward that middle asteroid, and my MC-75 is going to curve around again toward the middle of the table toward his ships, with my fighters moving along with them, and then my transports are going to turn in behind them right as we hit combat. So this is the start of turn 2. As you can see, I'm starting to do what I just talked about, and he is pretty much doing the same thing with his ships. All of his ships are pretty much needing to go speed 3. And so another thing is making him come to me, because I'm second player. I automatically win if no points are scored as second player. So the initiative is on him to attack me. So his ships are going to have to speed up to come to me, while I can just start doing other things with my ships and not having to worry about navving and controlling my speed in engagement. This is the turn before the fateful mistake that I'm going to talk about. If you see, most of his fighters are going to engage the front of my MC-75, and that's a good plan. What he ends up doing is, if you see Jan, she's down here. My thought process at first was, if I survive his alpha into me, I'm going to jump Jan forward to make his squadrons heavy, and then jump a bunch of my bombers and try to kill Yavaris straight out. That did not work due to the fact that he jumped Dutch in and toggled my activation slider for Jan, so Jan was just stuck there. But I got good flak off on everyone. Also, most of the squadrons were in close range of all of my ships in my front arc of my MC-75. So with Ordnance Pods, Ruthless, and normal flak, in addition to using my X-wings and Y-wings to attack his squadrons, in one activation I managed to kill Jan. I killed, I believe, Wedge, and I killed 10 Noob. But he decided to Riken on 10 Nub, which sucked. I don't know what I was thinking at this point. I was going speed 2, and I ended up landing on all my fighters and putting myself in a horrible position. What I should have done is I should have dropped down to speed 1 and still then made him move. But what I ended up doing was I just gave him a double tap with like all of his super powerful bombers right into the front of my MC-75, and it was a horrible time of me just slowly dying. Here, look. If you see this, there's just no way that 75 is going to survive where it is. I should have dropped speed. I didn't, and I paid the price for it. His MC-75 pretty much crashes right into my Yavaris, and it's gonna kill it. His fighters just ripped my 75 to shreds. There's really nothing that I can do with it, with the Yavaris double tapping 3 of his fighters into me 2 rounds in a row, because he pretty much last firsted into it. And then you can see that I managed to kill his Yavaris with my Yavaris, and almost all of his squadrons. At this point, my Yavaris is pretty much dead. I have no shields in the front, and his MC-75 is going to activate first. I know that my bombers, without really being commanded, are not going to kill his 75. So what I end up doing is I switch all of my fighters over to just kill his squadrons. Again, like what I talked about earlier, that plink damage. I have so many squadrons, I can plink squadrons to death if you give me the chance, and that's what I did. So at the end of the game, he tables me because he killed all of my actual combat ships, and my transports, don't help me not get tabled. But I managed to kill all of his fighters and his Yavaris. So the game ended with 475 points for him and 275 points for me, with a difference of 200, leaving me with 3 points to his 8. So at the end of the day, I ended up being in 16th place with 24 points. This is usually, honestly, where I end up in most tournaments, is right around the midway point. I really, really was thinking after the first 2 rounds that I might be able to push better, but that third game didn't swing my direction. My third round opponent, Josh, ended up taking 3rd place. My 4th round opponent, Lewis, ended up taking 6th place. And my 2nd round opponent ended up taking, where is he on this list? 12th place. So most of the people that I played ended up placing better than me. And 2 of the people that I played, both Josh and Lewis, got world invites out of this because of the trickle-down effect of the people above them already had world invites. So overall, I think this tournament was a lot of fun. And I enjoyed all the games that I played, and all my opponents were wonderful to play against. And it's just nice to go to a tournament and enjoy playing against the people that are there. It really shows how good of a community that Armada has, and that's awesome. It's really awesome to have so many great people. Now, on the downside is I don't know if I really want to go back to the Las Vegas Open. The tournament itself wasn't well run. You could tell that Armada is not their big thing. The tournament itself was actually called X-wing Armada, as if we were a sub-genre of X-wing. And there were no leaderboards that were posted. There were no round scores that were posted. There were no next rounds posted on paper anywhere. It was kind of just the TO telling you where to go. There was also no lists that were collected for this tournament. So only one of my opponents actually had a paper list of what their fleet was, which makes it very difficult to check to see what your opponent has. This is the only tournament that I've ever been at that was like that. So most of the way I found out what my opponents had was literally just taking pictures of what cards they had set up on their side of the table. They had no end of round slips of any kind or scoring thing. You would just tell your score to the TO. And I think this is kind of just ridiculous. This is supposed to be a national championship level game. And I've been to store championships that were better organized. Also, it was advertised as a 2-day tournament. Day 1 was on Friday, and day 2 would be on Sunday. So a complete skip of a day for the tournament. And then when they were doing the tournament announcements on day 1, they announced that the top cut will be top 2 people to play for the championship on Sunday. And I feel like this is kind of like a hook, line, and sinker type I gotcha maneuver. Because coming from Chicago, one, I had to get time off work. We flew there on Thursday, and the tournament was Friday. Saturday was a day not tournament, and then Sunday you had to be possibly there if you made it into what we assumed would have been top 8, because that's usually how these tournaments are run, which was then just a top 2, 1 game, and you're done tournament. So people had to buy hotels for extra days for things that they really didn't need to. They could have gotten this tournament done in 1 day if they were doing a top 2 cut. And that's probably what they should have done. But instead we were having to buy extra convention passes, extra days of hotels. You had to deal with flight. This just didn't sit well with me. But on the bright side, it was a fun tournament, and I enjoyed the players that I played with. But the convention was poorly run. And that's something that sticks with me. So I hope you enjoyed this video and hearing about the tournament that I went to. So thank you for watching. This is Iron Radio, and I've been John.